Hey, what's up guys, and thanks for tuning into your third tutorial on C++. And in this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about variables. Now, variables are a way to store information. There are many different types of variables, but the most common ones that we're going to use, I'm going to go over right now. And variables are things that represent some piece of information. There are integer variables, which are numbers, and you basically declare that. You declare any variable by declaring what type of variable it's going to be. In this case, it's an integer, and then giving it a name. Now, when you want to use it in the future, you just write its name and then assign it some value. So, like 10. Now, let's say we want to write a program that basically just outputs the value of two numbers times together. We could declare another integer called number2. Same thing, just we declare what kind of variable it is and then give it a name. And then we do the same thing. We just go ahead and assign it a value. So we say number2 equals 10. Then we can declare a third variable, integer total, and we can say total equals number1 times number2. Don't worry about the times, we'll get into that in another tutorial. But now when we see out this, what we'll get if we see out total is it should just say 100. So when we run it, boom, it says 100. So those are integer variables, and integers are really good for holding whole numbers. Now let's say we wanted to hold like a 10.5. If we were to do this, it only says 100 because integers are only whole numbers. So if we want to do something that has a decimal point, or we want to use a bigger number, we can use, there's actually quite a few different variables that are used for holding larger numbers or complex numbers. One of my favorites is just a float. So we just say float total, and we can change all of these to floats actually. And this will hold, not only will it hold integer numbers, but it will also hold numbers that have decimal points, and it'll also hold really big numbers that integers won't hold. So you can have, hundreds of thousands of digits here. Well, actually, I don't think it's that big, but anyways, whatever. You can Google it if you want to know the exact amount of information that a float can hold. So when we run this, it'll give us a little more. So it'll say 105. So it's just a little more correct. So this is the basic structure of declaring variables. You declare what kind of variable, then you give the variable a name, and then you can use that variable. Now let's say I wanted to assign it a default value of, let's say, right now it has no default value. So right now we could give it a default value of like 100. Okay, so you can assign it a value when you declare it. This is called declaring the variable right here. And here we're assigning the variable we just declared a value of 100. So let's run it and see what we get. Okay, we still get 105. And the reason we do that is because right here we declare a variable, a float variable called number, and we assign it the value of 100. Then right here, number changes to 10.5. By the time total is assigned a value, it's number, which at this point is 10.5, times number2, which is 10. Now if I were to delete this, if I was to delete that and run it, then we would get a much larger number. 1,000, actually it's, yeah, I guess that's right. So we would get a bigger number because it's now at this point it's 100 times 10, which would be 1,000. Yeah, so that's the basic number variables. I want to teach you guys about one other type of variable that we're going to be using for right now. Mostly we're going to be using integers and floats, but there is one more, and to use it you need to add a new including. So you go up here and you just go include, and we want to include string. Okay, now once we use this including string, we can do the third type of variable, which is a string variable. So we declare it just like we did anything else. if I could spell right. And we're going to call this name, and we're going to make that equal my name. Okay? So now if you'll notice, with floats and integers, we just had to put 100 or 10, or for the total, we added two variables together. Because remember, this number right here is 100, this number 2 is 10, and that created total. But here, we're putting it in quotation marks. And that's because this is a string, which represents text. So it has to be put inside quotation marks. If you didn't put this in quotation marks, it wouldn't compile, it wouldn't run. You would see that Visual Studios is complaining that Robert identifier for Robert is undefined. And what that means is that it's looking for another variable named Robert, and it just doesn't exist, so it's not going to work. So when we put this back out, and we go ahead and we can see out Robert. Oh, sorry. Let's see out name. Then we will get 1,000 and then my name. So we run it, and 1,000 Robert. So that's just about all you need for variables. You can do. Oh, one last thing I wanted to tell you guys. If you were to do something like this, okay, we have a float number equals 100, and float number 2 doesn't equal anything here, and float total. If we tried to say total equals number plus number 2, now because number 2 is not defined, we're going to go ahead and get an error. So there were build errors, and it's not going to build. And the reason that is because number 2 is not defined. Some other languages, if you declare just a random number, a float or an integer, but you don't give it any value, it will just automatically assign it to 0. But C++, if you don't assign something a value, it does not have one. So by default, I know a lot of new programmers think that by default, if you declare a variable, maybe it'll equal 0. But that's not the case. If we actually assign it 0, then this will run and it will give us 100. So, well, it would give us 100 if I outed it, but since I didn't, it just did nothing. So that's our little introduction to variables. And in the next video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about cin. So thanks.